All right, here we are, hour number 2 on a Thursday at the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. Chris Brown, Steve Tasker, and joined now by the co-host of the Check the Mic podcast that you find on the 33rd team. It's one Steve Palazzolo joining us. Steve, thanks for the time, first of all. And, you know, we know that you guys, you and your partner there, Sam Monson, were breaking down some of the fixes for the Bills this offseason, which, you know, in a vacuum sounds awesome. And I want it all to happen and get all the ducks lined up as easy as ABC, but as we know, that doesn't happen. And this offseason, I know Sam's kind of riding the X-receiver train like, hey, they got to fix X-receiver, they got to finish X-receiver. But as we were discussing before we came on the air, the free agent class is unsexy, especially if T. Higgins isn't available. And then the draft class is nothing to shout about either at receiver this year. What is a team to do?
Not have a great X-receiver, maybe. You know, I mean,
Maybe.
I don't think it gets solved this offseason.
Yeah.
But, look, it's not like the Bills have this awful offense that you're trying to resolve. We're nitpicking here, right? Every year it's like, how do you get this over this last hump? And I always describe offense as having multiple ways to win. And I think the Bills have several ways to win, and they have improved that ability over the last couple of years. It's not just the Josh Allen show. I know he was MVP, but the best thing he did this year was to distribute more, was to take care of the ball, was to let the playmakers do a lot of the work. So I still think they're in very good shape offensively. I think it's about Keon Coleman maybe developing, being able to win some one-on-ones a little bit more. But when you look at how the Bills are able to stress the defense, everything Josh Allen does stresses the defense, but then Khalil Shakir, Dalton Kincaid, Cook, and the other running backs out of the backfield, they do a great job of scheming those guys up. So they already stress defenses a ton. It would just be great if a guy like Coleman could maybe win some more one-on-ones on the outside.
To me, though, that and Bills fans, we're kind of over here and thinking about how the season went. That seems like an extra pedal of frosting on a road. You know, you don't really need – what you really need is the other side of the ball to hold up their end. And we were talking just before we came on. This Bills defense really – held its end of the bargain up in one way and one way only. They churned out turnovers. They didn't lose the turnover battle in any game this year, and it allowed them to get all the way to the conference championship. Everybody in our end of the building, we're looking at the defensive side of the ball and how can the Bills get some game wreckers over there. Free agency, the draft, both. We've had people say, don't draft a single offensive player. You know what I mean? The whole thing. What are your thoughts on how do you refurbish your complete defense like Brownie's been saying all week? The Chiefs did it with that McDuffie draft. They got a bunch of guys. Can the Bills do that this year?
So I think it's a good draft to get some defensive linemen. I think it's very deep. I think there's a lot of teams. Look, even if the Eagles didn't win it, and I made it highlight even more. Everybody's like, do what the Eagles do. And it's like they roll 8 deep on the defensive line, right? And they've always done that. But that's been an organizational philosophy for years. But for teams that do want to copy that a little bit and say, yeah, we want to have 7 and 8 guys that can get after the quarterback and some big bodies and some different body types, it's a great draft for that, right? You have your 340-plus pounders. You have your explosive edge rushers. And they're not just going to go top 15. There'll be some of those guys available in the late first and then with the 2-2s for Buffalo. I think a lot of teams should double up in the first 2 rounds on defensive line. So I think it's a great draft to be able to do that.
Yeah, and even if the best of the best is off the board by the time the Bills pick at 30, I think there are other positions they can pivot to. I know you and Sam on your pod talked about cornerback value there, maybe even some safety value there. So even if the cupboard is bare in terms of value at defensive tackle and edge, there are other ways that the Bills can pivot and still help themselves, right?
There's a few corners. Like all the best corners in this class got hurt this year. Will Johnson from Michigan, Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame, Siobhan Revell from East Carolina. They all got hurt. I think Will Johnson still probably goes in the top 15. I thought Morrison was a top 15 caliber player. Revell was on his way to being a top 15 player, even though he's at a smaller school at East Carolina. Right. And so I think there's the teams that need that starting corner or just have a cornerback need in the late first, I think there's great potential value there. So if Buffalo went corner and then circled back and grabbed 2 defensive linemen, it's like there's a way to reshape the defense with those first 3 picks.
I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but when you get up here and when you're talking about first-round players, there's one overriding characteristic they all have, and that's physical traits. That's why we're out here watching them jump around and run 40s and lift and do all of this stuff. Are there guys in this draft that have traits, maybe not the production, maybe not the bowl games, the Senior Bowl? Is there some traits out there, guys who may be higher than that trait-wise, but not so much when teams are looking at him.
So Shamar Stewart is the traits guy here from Texas A&M, and I'm a both guy. You know, I want production and the athleticism to back it up, but I think the production properly charted production probably holds more weight for me. So Stewart's going to be an interesting guy because he said he patterns his game after Julius Peppers, and it's like, that's not crazy. You're 6'6", 285, and you move unbelievably, but he didn't.
Yeah, Julius Pepper was a
But he was productive and a freak, right? Shamar might only be the freak, but he'll be an interesting player in the first round. I think Kenneth Grant, a lot of early mock drafts I know had Kenneth Grant going to Buffalo. I think that stops this week after he tests, and he might end up being
He'll
top
never
15.
make it.
I think he'll be a top 15 type of player like Jordan Davis a couple years ago from Georgia. So I think those guys, they're going to show out as far as the defensive line.
I know that when you and Sam were discussing it, you brought up Khalil Mack as a free agent option as an edge rusher add for the Bills roster. Was that under the assumption that Von Miller's going to be a cap casualty, and so he's your veteran presence, and then maybe you draft one as well? What's your kind of – are you throwing numbers at that position, both in free agency and the draft?
Yeah, I mean, that's, again, not that the Eagles are the only blueprint, but they throw numbers, right? I mean, the Niners did it a couple years ago in 2022. They had one of the best defensive lines, and then they traded for Randy Gregory and traded for Chase Young, and all of a sudden it's like, look at all these people here, and it gives you depth. And it also gives you the ability in a given game to get a guy to just go rush the quarterback 25 times. So I don't know exactly what happens with Vaughn, but certainly there were flashes at times this year. I don't think the signing has gone the way you want. So even if he was back, he's probably a 15 pass rush type of guy at this point. Khalil Mack still looks like a more every down type of player.
He's also an $8.5 million cap savings if you move him.
So. Whatever ends up happening there, I think you need a body. You need people anyway. So I love the idea of a free agent move, depending on what Khalil Mack's price tag is, and definitely it's a year to get young on the defensive line. I think you have to attack it in the draft.
And the Bills, and I'll put this up here, that the Bills have got 3 picks inside the top 62. Their 62nd pick. Then they got a 108. You're a big proponent of doubling up on draft picks, and I kind of like that thought as well. But do you go, which position do you double up on? Defensive line, right? End, tackle, both, count them as kind of the same kind of rotational players, or do you look for position flexibility? I've seen there's a lot of guys in this draft, the trait guys who at the college level, they can go inside, they can go outside. You see them getting moved around because they're so much better than what I call the dental students that they're playing with. They gotta plug them in around.
Don't disparage those offensive linemen. But a guy like Darius Alexander from Toledo, I don't know what he ended up weighing in at, but he's probably close to 290-ish, right? He could play inside and outside. I love those flexible guys. I think for a double-up move, though, just the defensive line in general. We know there's certain games where I think Buffalo feels like they feel light up front and they could use that big body nose. I feel like that's been one of those every year somebody would love to see more consistency as far as the big 320-plus pounder there. So I think there's value there. And you can literally never have too many edge rushers, especially if you are going to move them around and create mismatches. So I think the double up on the defensive line in this particular draft with 3 picks in the top 62 does make a lot of sense.
Last one from me. We see the resurgence of the run game this past year in the league. Teams were leaning on the run game more. I think there were 8 teams in total that ran the ball 48% of the time or more. The previous year it was 3 teams. So there is a little bit of a resurgence to lean on the run game a bit more, and 7 of those 8 teams made the playoffs that were 48% run or higher, including the Bills. With that in mind, the defensive answer would seem to be, if they're going to run this much, we can't sit in traditional nickel all the time. They're going to run our slot corner over with a pulling guard all day and all night. Is Nick Imanwari got perfect timing for where the league is going, which could very well be on defense, more big nickel to kind of neutralize or answer that?
No, it's a great question. I think linebackers too. You just need that flexibility. Imanwari he's gonna crush it from a testing standpoint. So I think whether it's a guy that's a safety in name or a guy like Jihad Campbell who's a linebacker in name, that skill set, that literal 3-down skill set where you trust him against the run. And look, I always say it's linebackers, but let's just say second-level players generally. Their job is so difficult in today's NFL, right? You have to take on that pulling guard. You have to run the seam with a tight end. You have to tackle Lamar Jackson in space. Right. The job description is way more difficult than it was years ago. And if you have those special types of players, it is a force multiplier type, for your defense. So Emanwari, a Jihad Campbell at linebacker, I think those guys
maybe Walker too, right? Like, he can be off the ball and he can do everything.
Literal hybrid linebacker and edge, a skill set that you just very rarely see. Micah Parsons, was generational and special, but Jalen Walker has that type of skill.
Last one from me, and it dovetails off the run game and the pronouncement of it. We've got James Cook on the Bills, who it's time for him to be addressed maybe as a candidate for an extension, or maybe making plays the last year of his deal and let him be a free agent or let him test the market. Value, you got Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry really making a case for putting the running backs back at the centerpiece of an offense. Where does that leave a guy like James Cook, who's more versatile than those two guys? Well, he's versatile like Barkley is. Where does that leave a guy like James Cook?
It's a tough balance, because the analyst in me is still saying, look, the run game's not fully back, not to the point where you have to invest in the running back like that. Derrick Henry was still great in Tennessee, but the run blocking was terrible. He just went to the best run blocking, one of the better run blocking situations with the best running quarterback of all time. That's Derrick Henry's production. Saquon Barkley went to one of the best run-blocking situations in Philadelphia. His specialty's taken it to the house. You come to Cook here. I love the ability to create big plays. He would have been a legend, man, if you guys just pulled that game off against the Chiefs with that fourth down run. It was unbelievable. I think there's a hybrid to be had, though. I don't think you're paying him $20 million a year. He probably makes more than what Saquon makes, and I think you can make the case that because of his explosiveness for the next 2 or 3 years, he's extremely valuable. You add Josh Allen's running ability in there. That accentuates Cook's skill set. So I could see them locking him up, but I don't think we get to this point where the running back becomes like $20 million a year.
Do you think there's that big a difference between an elite guy like James Cook, Derrick Henry, and he put James into those conversation with Barkley and Cook and Henry? Is there enough of a chasm between their production and the guys that are just below that you can get for a tenth of the price?
I would lean to say no, but I love explosive players, right? I think Jahmyr Gibbs, he is a force multiplier for the Lions because of all the other pieces, right? So I would never say build the offense around James Cook,
right?
But when you have Allen, when you have those other guys that are tough, creating after the catch, then you add Cook to the mix, you can justify it more. So is he the driver? No, but when you have all of those ingredients, then it seems to justify it for me. And that is a difference between, the next running back who isn't as explosive and, can only turn it into a 5-yard gain when, James Cook's going 20, 30, or 40.
Right. Yeah, he's not the driver, but he's riding shotgun.
Yeah.
Steve Palazzolo, thanks for the time. We appreciate it. Thanks for making some time for us.